I didn't say a word when my aunt walked into my grandmother's house and started measuring the living room with a tape measure. She didn't ask. She didn't knock. She just walked in, pulled the yellow tape from her purse like she already owned the place, and called out numbers to my cousin standing in the doorway with a notepad. My grandmother had been dead for 11 days. I sat at the kitchen table, with both hands around a mug of cold coffee, and I watched her move through the rooms that still smelled like lavender and old books and the particular warmth of someone who had loved me my whole life. I didn't shout. I didn't stand up. I just watched, and I made a note of everything I saw. That was the moment I understood that what was coming would not be simple. And I decided, right then, that I would not be simple either. My name is Nora. I'm 28 years old. I'm a registered nurse. And I work night shifts at a regional hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. I am not a confrontational person by nature. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in assuming good intentions, in having the harder conversation before jumping to conclusions. My grandmother raised me that way. She used to say that a closed mouth gathers no foot, and a patient woman gathers everything else. I have been patient my entire life. I was patient when my parents divorced, and I shuttled between two houses with a backpack full of the wrong textbooks. I was patient when my aunt, my mother's older sister, the one I'll call Renee, spent every holiday finding small ways to remind everyone that she had married better, earned more, chosen smarter. I was patient when my grandmother got sick, and Renee showed up at the hospital with opinions about the treatment plan, but never once offered to do a night shift sitting with her. I was there every night I wasn't working. I held her hand. I learned her medication schedule by heart. I was the one she called when she was scared, and I was the one who was there when she wasn't scared anymore, when she finally let go just before 4 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, with the heat running loud, and snow coming down outside the window. Renee sent flowers to the funeral. They were beautiful. She also gave a little speech at the reception about how close they had always been. I kept my mouth shut and refilled the coffee carafe. The will was read 10 days later. My grandmother had been careful and deliberate, which surprised no one who actually knew her. She had a house, a modest savings account, and a small investment portfolio she had built over 30 years of disciplined living. She had also, in the last year of her life, transferred the investment account just over $90,000 into a joint account with me. The beneficiary she had named years ago and never changed. She told me about it 8 months before she died. We were sitting on her porch in September, drinking sweet tea, and she said she wanted me to know because she didn't want there to be confusion later. She said Renee had a husband who made good money and a house that was paid off and children who had never gone without anything. She said I was the one who had shown up, and she wanted the showing up to mean something after she was gone. I thanked her, and then I cried a little, and she handed me a napkin and told me to stop being dramatic. After the will reading, Renee was quiet in a way that felt like weather coming. She hugged me in the parking lot of the attorney's office, and said we would talk soon. Her eyes didn't match her voice when she said it. I drove home and made dinner and went to work that night, and didn't think too much about it. 3 weeks later, I got an alert from my bank. It wasn't my regular account. It was the investment account, the one that had transferred to me legally, the one that had my name on it, the one that my grandmother had set up with an attorney present. The alert said there had been an inquiry. A third-party institution had run my credit and pulled account information through a financial verification service. I sat with my phone in the break room at 2 in the morning and read the notification 3 times. I knew what a hard inquiry looked like. I ran credit checks on my own accounts twice a year because a colleague had once told me it was the first thing smart people do and the last thing anyone actually does. I knew that an inquiry meant someone had tried to access information tied to my financial identity. And I knew that I had not authorized anyone to do that. I didn't call Renee. I didn't text her. I went back to my patients and finished my shift, and in the morning I drove to my bank before I went home to sleep. The branch manager was a woman named Carol who had helped me set up the account originally, and who remembered my grandmother because my grandmother had brought her a tin of homemade shortbread at Christmas for 11 consecutive years. Carol pulled up everything on her screen and walked me through it carefully. Someone had called the bank's customer service line 4 days earlier. They had given my name, my date of birth, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. They had asked about the balance on the account and whether a transfer could be initiated with a letter of authorization. The customer service representative had followed protocol. They had said that any transfer would require written authorization with notarized signature and valid ID. They had not given out any account information. But the inquiry itself had been logged, and it had triggered the alert that reached me. I asked Carol if there was any way to know who had made the call. She said the number was logged. She turned her screen toward me for just a moment, long enough for me to see the first 3 digits of the area code. It was Renee's area code. She lives in Charlotte. I thanked Carol and asked her to flag the account for any further contact attempts. I asked her to require in-person verification with 2 forms of ID for any future inquiries. She made a note of everything and told me she was sorry about my grandmother, and I thanked her again and went home. I did not sleep for a long time. Here is what I knew. Renee had my social security number. She had it because 6 years ago, when I was 22 and fresh out of nursing school and completely broke, she had offered to co-sign a car loan for me. It was one of the few genuinely kind things she had done. I had given her my information to fill out the application, and the loan had gone through, and I had paid it off in 2 years. But she still had the paperwork. She still had everything she needed. Here is what I suspected. She had expected a larger share of my grandmother's estate, or possibly expected the investment account to go through probate, where she might have had some claim to contest. When she found out the account had transferred directly to me outside of the estate, she had started looking for a way in. I am a nurse. I spend my nights monitoring patients for changes that are so subtle most people would miss them. I notice when a number shifts by 2 points. I notice when someone's breathing pattern changes between checks. I am trained to observe without reacting, to document everything, and to wait for the right moment to act. I spent the next 6 weeks doing exactly that. I called the financial verification service that had been used to run the inquiry. After navigating their compliance line for 40 minutes, I reached someone who confirmed that a request had been submitted using my identifying information. They would not tell me who submitted it, but they confirmed the date. And they confirmed that the request had not been completed because it failed their secondary verification step. They had attempted to call me directly and received no answer, which triggered an automatic hold. I wrote all of this down in a document on my laptop that I kept behind 2 different passwords. I called an attorney. Not a family attorney. Not someone Renee might know through my mother's social circles. I found a woman named Patricia, who specialized in estate law and financial fraud, whose office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and who had a manner that reminded me of my grandmother, precise, unhurried, and completely, without sentiment, when sentiment wasn't useful. Patricia listened to everything I had. She looked at the bank alert, the inquiry log, the notes from my conversation with Carol, and the timeline I had assembled. She asked me 3 questions. Did Renee have my identifying information legally? Had any actual transfer occurred? No. Did I have documentation of the inquiry attempt? Yes. She said what had happened so far was not yet criminal, but that it was exactly the kind of pattern that became criminal quickly. She said the co-sign paperwork gave Renee legitimate possession of my information, but that using it to impersonate me to a financial institution even unsuccessfully crossed a line. She said we needed to wait and document and make sure that the next move Renee made, if she made one, was complete enough to act on. I asked her how long that might take. She said, in her experience, people who want money don't stay patient for long. She was right. 5 weeks later, my cousin Renee's son, who is 24 and has always been the kind of person who tries to stay out of the middle, but ends up there anyway, texted me and asked if I had gotten the letter. I had not gotten any letter. He said his mother had mentioned sending me something formal. He said she had told him it was about settling things properly. He sounded uncomfortable in the way that people sound when they know something is wrong but haven't decided what to do about it yet. I thanked him and checked my mail when I got home from work that morning. There was an envelope from a notary service in Charlotte. Inside was a document that took me several reads to fully process. Renee had drafted what she called a memorandum of informal agreement. It stated that, prior to my grandmother's death, my grandmother had verbally communicated to Renee her intention to divide the investment account equally between her 2 granddaughters, me and Renee's daughter, who is 19. It stated that I, by accepting the full transfer of the account, had received funds that were not solely intended for me and that I therefore owed Renee's daughter the sum of $45,000. It listed a payment deadline of 60 days. At the bottom of the document, there was a signature line for me. There was also, in the bottom right corner of the page, a signature that was meant to look like mine. It was close. It was not perfect, but it was close. Someone had practiced, or traced, or found a sample somewhere. It was placed above a line that read, acknowledged and agreed by recipient. My grandmother had never said anything of the kind to Renee. I knew this because my grandmother had told me specifically, clearly, and with the kind of deliberate intention that she brought to everything important, exactly what she wanted and why. And I knew this because the attorney who had helped her set up the account was a careful woman who had my grandmother's actual stated intentions documented in writing, signed and witnessed, with no mention of any informal verbal arrangement. Someone had forged my signature on a legal document. I took photographs of every page. I put the envelope in a Ziploc bag. I called Patricia the same afternoon. She was quiet for a moment when I finished reading her the document. Then she said, there it is. We talked for an hour. She explained that what Renee had done was not a gray area. A forged signature on a document asserting a financial claim is fraud. The informal memorandum, while not itself a legally binding instrument, was being used as a predicate for a financial demand, which made the forgery relevant to federal wire fraud statutes, particularly if she intended to pursue the claim through any electronic means. The account inquiry, now, combined with the forged document and the financial demand, formed a pattern. Patricia said we had 2 options. We could file a complaint with the state attorney general's office and wait for an investigation that could take a year and might not go anywhere. Or we could move faster and cleaner. I asked her what faster and cleaner looked like. She told me, I want to be honest about something. There was a part of me that wanted to call Renee. Not to warn her. Exactly, but because she is my mother's sister, and she has been at every birthday and every holiday for my entire life. And because I remember a version of her from when I was small that was warmer than the version she became. My cousin, her son, had always been kind to me. My mother would be caught in the middle of whatever happened next. I thought about all of this for 3 days. I sat with it in the way my grandmother had taught me to sit with hard things, not pushing it away, not drowning in it, just letting it be present until I knew what I actually thought. What I thought was this. Renee had my grandmother's shortbread tin sitting on her kitchen counter. I had seen it in a photo my cousin posted. She had taken it from the house during that first visit, the one with the tape measure, before any of us had said anything about personal items. She had taken it because she could. I thought about what that meant, about what she would do with $45,000 if I handed it over. I called Patricia back on the 4th day and told her I was ready. The plan was not complicated. It was simply patient. Renee had, in her memorandum, requested that I respond in writing within 60 days. Patricia drafted a response on my behalf, professionally worded, neither agreeing nor disputing, asking for a meeting to discuss the matter in person and to review any supporting documentation Renee might have. The letter was warm. It sounded like the letter of someone who was taking the claim seriously and wanted to resolve things amicably. Renee called me 2 days after receiving it. She sounded relieved, which told me she had been nervous, which told me she understood somewhere inside herself that what she was doing was wrong. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Charlotte on a Saturday morning. Neutral ground, she said. I agreed. I did not tell her that Patricia had prepared a notary who would be present. I did not tell her that I had contacted the Financial Fraud Division of the State Attorney General's office and that they had expressed interest in the case pending further documentation. I did not tell her that I had a digital copy of the bank inquiry log, the notary service records, a handwriting analysis from a certified examiner whom Patricia had hired, and a signed statement from my grandmother's attorney confirming the exact nature and intent of the account transfer. I brought all of it in a manila folder inside a canvas bag. I ordered a black coffee. I sat down and waited. Renee arrived in a good coat and with a kind of careful brightness that told me she had rehearsed. She hugged me. She said she was glad we were doing this. She said she hoped we could keep it simple. I said I hoped so too. We talked for a few minutes about nothing, about my mother, about how hard the winter had been, about my cousin's new apartment. And then she set a folder of her own on the table, and folded her hands, and said she thought we both knew why we were there. I said I did know why we were there. I let her talk. She explained the verbal understanding. She described a conversation she claimed to have had with my grandmother on a specific afternoon in October, in the kitchen, over tea. She described it with detail, what they were drinking, what the weather was like, what my grandmother had said word for word. It was practiced. It was a story she had been telling herself long enough that it had texted her. When she finished, she slid her folder toward me. Inside was a copy of the memorandum, and a handwritten note that she said was my grandmother's, a piece of paper, with a few lines in a handwriting that was close to my grandmother's, but not quite right in the way that forged things are never quite right. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened my canvas bag. I set down the bank's inquiry log with the Charlotte area code on the flagged call. I set down the letter from the Financial Verification Service. I set down the handwriting analysis the certified examiner had compared the forged note to verified samples of my grandmother's handwriting from her attorney's files and found 12 points of inconsistency. I set down the statement from my grandmother's attorney. And then I set down a 1-page summary from Patricia outlining the legal exposure Renee currently faced. Forgery of a private document, attempted financial fraud, and unauthorized use of identifying information. I slid it all across the table the same way she had slid her folder. I said I didn't think this was actually a conversation about what my grandmother said. Renee looked at the documents. The careful brightness left her face in stages. The way light goes out of a room when clouds move across the sun. She said she didn't understand what she was looking at. I explained it to her, the same way I explain things to patients' families when the news is not good and clarity is the kindest thing I can offer. Calmly, without drama, without raising my voice. I told her what had been documented, what had been analyzed, and what had already been shared with the Attorney General's office. I told her that the notary Patricia had brought was sitting at the counter behind her, available if Renee wanted to sign anything specifically, a retraction of the memorandum and an agreement not to pursue the claim or make further contact regarding the account. Renee's hands were flat on the table. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You were always her favorite." I said I knew. And I said that my grandmother had been specific and intentional about every decision she made in the last year of her life. And that I was going to honor those decisions. And that I was not going to give Renee money that my grandmother had left to me because Renee had written a document with a signature that was not mine and a note in a handwriting that was not my grandmother's. She signed the retraction. Her hand was not steady. I thanked her. I meant it sincerely. I thanked her for signing, because it was the right thing to do, and doing the right thing late is still doing the right thing. I drove home and called my mother. That conversation was its own kind of hard, and I won't pretend otherwise. My mother cried. She said she didn't know. I believe her. I told her I was not cutting anyone out of my life, that Renee was still her sister and still my cousin's mother, but that I needed her to understand what had happened. She listened. She cried some more. She said she needed time. I said that was fine. Time is the one thing I'm not afraid to give. The Attorney General's office ultimately decided, given the retraction and the lack of completed financial harm, that prosecution was not in the public interest. Patricia had anticipated that possibility. She said the retraction and the documented pattern would remain on file, which meant that any future attempt would carry significantly greater consequences. I used a portion of my grandmother's money to pay off the last of my student loans. I put the rest in a high-yield account and left it mostly alone, the way she would have. I kept her recipe for shortbread. I made it at Christmas and brought a tin to Carol at the bank because Carol had been the first person to take my concerns seriously. And because my grandmother believed in thanking the people who do their jobs with care. Renee and I have not spoken since the coffee shop. My cousin still texts me sometimes birthday messages, occasional memes, the ordinary maintenance of a relationship that matters even when the larger situation is complicated. I text back. I'll keep texting back. Some people will say, I should have warned her. That I should have called before the meeting, before Patricia, before the documents were assembled, and given her the chance to pull back on her own. I thought about that. I decided that the tape measure in my grandmother's living room, 11 days after the funeral, was all the warning Renee had needed and hadn't taken. Some chances come earlier than the moment when you think to look for them. My grandmother used to tell me that the most powerful thing a woman can own is a clear conscience and a well-documented paper trail. She said it like a joke, but she had both, every day of her life. I understand now what she meant. What is mine is documented. What is hers is memory, and measure, and an October afternoon that never happened. She can keep all of it. I already have everything I need.